CBS News continuing coverage of Showdown in the Gulf. From CBS News headquarters in New York, here are Connie Chung and Charles Kuralt.
Here are the headlines at this hour. A new wave of Allied bombing apparently is underway. 1,000 sorties last night, more tonight. It's nighttime over there. Allied troops are massing on the Kuwait border. That may signal the start of the ground war pretty soon. The president says he is pleased with progress in the Gulf War so far, but still no sign that Saddam Hussein is backing down, though the White House has called upon him now to surrender. Increased air activity in Saudi Arabia seems to indicate that a new wave of strikes against Iraq is indeed underway during the Persian Gulf night. That report brought this response from Marines in Saudi Arabia.
I think it's pretty good right now. Anything to speed this up to get us home sooner is fine with me.
Well, sitting in the desert for about 5 months, it's about time something happening.
You're glad about this?
Well, I'm not glad about the aspect about going to war, and I don't think any Marine sitting here in this desert is, but something's happening, and it's the start. It's the start of something.
Now what's going to happen?
I remember you as a man that comes to me and says that.
That's what I'm worried about. What happens next?
Every time I see him.
The air war began with devastating suddenness last night with the launching of about 100 Tomahawk cruise missiles. The Pentagon has high praise for the Tomahawk's first combat performance. And after the missiles came the planes. Everything in the American arsenal, F-14s, F-18s, B-52s, those high-flying bombers, stealth fighters, British Tornadoes, French Jaguars. And this morning, the first word of a U.S. loss, an F-18 shot down and its pilot killed. The only American casualty of the war that we know about so far. Defense Secretary Dick Cheney warned, don't count on a quick win.
It is important, I think, for everyone to be careful about claiming victory or making assumptions about the ultimate cost of this operation in terms of casualties. So far, so good. But I would urge all of you to be cautious in your reporting, just as we're trying very hard to be very cautious and very precise in terms of what we say about the status of the operation to date.
Still attending church in Virginia, President Bush pronounced himself pleased with the early accounts of action in the Gulf, as well he might be. Saddam Hussein was seen on Iraqi television, pumping up support, not looking like a defeated man at all. Now, CBS News personnel in Saudi Arabia say Allied forces are on the Kuwaiti border, en masse, on the ground, perhaps prepared to take the war to the Iraqis on the ground. The news from the Gulf has been welcomed on Wall Street. Stock prices are up sharply on heavy trading.
Charles, as each new wave of attack occurs, another wave being launched by the United States now, an air attack on Iraq and Kuwait, there is great anticipation as the pilots return back to Saudi Arabia. Bob Simon reports.
Planners and analysts may divide the air war into neat phases and stages, but the pilots just keep on flying. F-15s have been taking off from this air base in Dhahran at about the same rate they did last night this time, and many of the pilots returned from their first missions just a few hours ago. Fighters sailed back to their bases in Saudi Arabia today with stories of missions successful to the point of surprise.
When we went in there and did exactly what we wanted to do. We had air superiority the entire time. He came up very little. We went in with some very precision bombers. We went in some very heavily defended areas and dropped some excellent bombs.
It is said that no battle plan survives combat. This seemed to be an exception. It all followed the grand design. Fighters, strikers, AWACS working in harmony. The only thing missing was the opposition.
Well, I've been training for 13 years for this day. It's like being a professional athlete and never playing a game. Today was the first game, and the enemy didn't show up. The opponent didn't show up. We went out there and ran our first play, and it worked great. Scored a touchdown. There was nobody home.
I guess if somebody was coming into my homeland, I would go after them a little bit harder. I feel like, than he came after us. But see, I don't have all the knowledge of all the damage that's been done. Maybe he couldn't come any harder than he did.
Only one pilot said he actually saw the enemy, an Iraqi Mirage, which he shot down with a deadly missile called a Sparrow.
When he blew up, I could see a piece of the airplane blowing up. Obviously, it was at night. I couldn't see if a parachute or anything like that. It was a huge fireball. I don't anticipate anybody getting out of that.
The precise forecast for Desert Storm was kept secret till the last minute to all but the pilots. Telephones at the base were shut down last night to prevent idle chatter. But many said they knew something was up when they were ordered to take pills to prevent nerve agent poisoning. The Saudi pilots sought out a different agent for their protection, Allah, before they soared off into the Arabian skies. One of the pilots we heard from a moment ago told reporters earlier this week that he expected more than a few planes to be shot down in the opening round. One prediction he must be gratified to have been wrong about. Bob Simon, CBS News, Saudi Arabia.
Bob McEwen has been on Wall Street all morning since the opening bell. We'll go to him live now. Bob, I'm sure you saw the report, the Financial News Network report, that a Dow Jones service report saying terrorists have hit U.S. installations in abroad. And we have heard from Orrin Hatch on the Hill that indeed there have been at least 6, according to him, incidents. Any reaction on Wall Street to that?
Not really, Connie. It's been a very positive day here at the New York Stock Exchange. I think when this war began, the biggest economic concern was obviously oil. What would happen with Saddam Hussein within striking distance of 20% of the world's oil production and 50% of the world's oil reserves? Well, that concern simply hasn't manifested itself here today. The stock market is up strongly, even despite those reports that you mentioned, and the price of oil is down dramatically. In fact, the biggest one-day drop in history. It went down so fast on the New York Mercantile Exchange that it tripped the automatic shutdown device, which takes place when the price varies by $7.50 a barrel one way or the other. They halted trading at 10:01 this morning for an hour. They've resumed trading since, and a barrel of crude oil on the February contract is now down about $9.50 from yesterday. Gold is down as well, about $29 an ounce. Generally speaking, in the stock picture, defense-based stocks are up. General Dynamics, United Technology, GM, McDonnell Douglas, all up. One analyst to whom we spoke said he interpreted this as almost a sympathy vote of a sort because the prospect of a short war, and that seems to be the prevailing opinion here now, would not normally push the value of those issues up. As you might imagine, petroleum-based stocks are generally down, except for Exxon, which at the moment is up 1. They call this kind of response, although it did not occur in the case of the incidents you reported, headline trading. And certainly the headlines over the past 24 hours have restored a lot of confidence in this market. And barring anything unforeseen for the rest of the day, it seems that the next headline that the traders and investors here will look towards will be the results of the bombing raids in the Middle East that appear to be underway now.
Bob, do you get the sense, since rumors travel so rapidly on Wall Street, do you get the sense on the floor that reports are traveling accurately?
Well, everyone reads the wires that are up, and you see as many people reading the financial pages as you do the front pages, I suppose. It's really hard to tell what the rumor mill is doing, but the trend has been very strong. Now, on the other side of that is the expectation that markets have an upside and a downside. I don't think anyone would be terribly surprised if tomorrow we saw a downward turn after this very, very strong day at the New York Stock Exchange.
Have you heard concern about Allied troop movement and American troops?
No, when we spoke to people coming into the exchange this morning, they spoke of an emotional tone to the day as they saw it. And I think that's been the case. I think many people are sort of buying and selling with their heart perhaps today as opposed to with another instinct. It doesn't really seem to matter what the report is. The trend has been in an upward direction. There was an occasional lull, an occasional rally, but basically at the moment we're 96 points up on 240 million shares. It's been a very strong day here on Wall Street.
Thank you very much, Bob McEwen on Wall Street. Charles?
Cuddy, we have grown used to inflated Iraqi rhetoric. We may hope that this is another example of it. The Iraqi ambassador to Belgium said on Belgian radio a little while ago that Iraq has not lost its capacity to fight with chemical arms, indeed has every plan to use chemical arms if American ground forces enter Kuwait. The envoy said an attack on Israel is still planned, in spite of what we have heard about the capacity of the Iraqis to do that, being knocked out last night, and that the decision has been made. The timing, he says, is a secret. And he goes on to say that the United States was exaggerating the success of its air raids. Standing by in Washington now is former Defense Secretary James Schlesinger. Dr. Schlesinger, thank you very much for joining us. I seem to remember that back in November, you were in favor of relying on sanctions rather than taking military action. How do you feel about what's happened in the last 24 hours?
Well, I think that it's evident that the administration decided at the end of November to go for the military option. And I think that war has been inevitable since that time. I did point out during my testimony that if one expected more than to achieve the result of the UN resolutions, that it would be necessary to go to war. I think it's evident that we want to add on to those UN resolutions to reduce Iraqi military capacity and to eliminate Saddam Hussein as ruler of Iraq. And if one has those objectives, one is going to have to go to war rather than rely on the sanctions.
Well, go to war this country has done. It's been an air war so far. You know about things like this. How much easier is it going to be for the troops who, we assume, eventually will have to go into Kuwait, that the United States has achieved this victory in the air?
Well, I think that the air war has gone spectacularly well and better than expectations. For whatever reason, the air defense capabilities of the Iraqis have proved to be inept, and we seem to have achieved, amazing as it is, tactical surprise. There was never any doubt that we were going to be dominant in the air. There was only a question of how many days it would take to achieve dominance. The real question from the first, as you've indicated, has been whether and how long it would take us to move on the ground to eject their forces from Kuwait. The air war will help. The longer the air war goes on and the greater the punishment inflicted on the forces on the ground, the better off that our ground forces will be. But as of the moment, with the troops moving forward, one is concerned that they may move forward too quickly and take too heavy casualties. If we delay and allow the air to do its job, we will limit those casualties.
Dr. Schlesinger, is it a dead certainty in your mind that there will be a ground war? That we've heard reports of defections from the Iraqi army already, even some tanks coming over into Saudi Arabia to surrender. Might morale be so battered by this bombing from the air that a protracted land war won't be necessary?
I think that it is possible that that will occur. Certainly we may avoid a protracted land war, but sooner or later we are going to have to go in and seize that territory in all likelihood. If we are prepared to sustain the air war for 2 or 3 weeks and batter those forces on the ground, if we are able to knock out the Republican Guards, then the conscripts in Kuwait may begin to desert. I would not at this stage, however, pay too much attention to the rumor mills about the number of desertions that are taking place. I think that those forces in southern Kuwait are well dug in, and as a consequence, we are at this moment probably going to have to plan on ejecting them rather than their morale collapsing. It is always possible that morale will collapse, but I don't think that you can count on it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Schlesinger, former Secretary of Defense, former Secretary of Energy, too, for that matter, for joining us from Washington. Yes, it's hard to imagine the Iraqi army, the 5th largest in the world, just all suddenly standing up as a result of this pounding from the air and saying, we surrender. I imagine that General Michael Dugan will have some thoughts on that. Let's go across the studio now to Morley Safer with General Dugan. Morley?
General, we've talked about the stealth bomber, which is about the newest weapon in the arsenal. But just as effective, apparently, are one of the oldest weapons, B-52s, which have been pounding away, perhaps on their third mission as we speak. What is this oldest of all airplanes? What is its mission?
It is, I think, the oldest of our airplanes. The newest one was delivered in 1962. The crews that are flying them are considerably younger than the airplanes themselves. But its mission, Morley, is largely to take out what are called area targets. Area targets could be described, sometimes they're, for example, rail yards, if you have a big rail capacity in a country. But troops in a garrison arrangement, troops in an assembly area, troops, for example, where the strategic reserves, the Republican Guard divisions that we've heard about, located in the vicinity of Basra, that the chairman alluded to this morning, those would be the kind of target that B-52s could be very effective in attacking.
You know, during the Vietnam War, a lot of people, a lot of politicians, and I confess, a lot of reporters, really questioned the value of the B-52 raids, these massive carpet bombings. But I must confess, when I went back to Vietnam fairly recently and talked to their veterans and asked them what the worst of the war was, to a man, they said it was the B-52 raids, partly because you never knew. You couldn't hear them coming. The earth would simply explode. Now, I think there's little doubt that the Iraqi army has the kind of resolution that the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong had. Do you think that these raids against these barracks, these fixed targets, are designed not just to destroy enemy, but to ruin him psychologically?
Well, they're designed to destroy his military capability. But soldiers without military capability lose their will, and frequently the government that employs those soldiers loses its will. But the purpose of the task, in fact, is to destroy the military capability inherent in those divisions.
One of the most recent developments in the air war was the decision by the Turkish parliament to allow U.S. combat aircraft to use Turkish bases against Iraq. Does this give the Allied forces another front?
It provides another axis of attack for Iraq to worry about. It provides symbolically and politically, increased leverage to the coalition that Iraq faces, because, in fact, this was another step by one of the nations that is allied against it. And so, I think it compounds both the military and the political problem for Iraq. I think it's an important step.
You know, there's one other factor which has nothing to do with the air war. Here we are, day 2.
Day 1 isn't over yet.
Well, but it strikes me as a reporter, and I would be remiss if I didn't confess my disquiet or concern, that the Pentagon plan to absolutely control information seems to be working almost effectively as this air war. We know so little.
Well, I think that's the nature of aerial combat, as opposed to being able to go with the troops to the front. And the ability to know in that very dispersed kind of environment where the air attacks took place, what happened is just not, you're not there.
And no pictures.
And pictures are difficult to come. Pictures are difficult to come by for soldiers, too.
Thank you, General.
Thank you, Morley. Thank you, General. Our CBS News coverage of Operation Desert Storm is going to continue shortly.
A cheese riddle. Excuse me, Giorgio. What do you get when you add mozzarella to an ordinary tomato? Something to sing about. That's right. Cheese makes it taste better. So don't forget the cheese.
If you think there's a longer-lasting shine than tough acrylic future, think again. For long-lasting acrylic protection, nothing outshines future.
Jet Dry Ultra with Film Fighter Plus works like magic. It removes the dull film that builds up on dishes, so they're ultra shiny, ultra clear. And we mean ultra clear. Jet Dry Ultra. Ultra shiny, ultra clear.
You made it through Thanksgiving. You made it through Christmas. You even made it through New Year's Eve. Just when you thought you made it through the holidays, along comes the big game. Make sure you still have some Alka-Seltzer.
Theragram wants to know. Changed my life.
Not much.
With Theragram M multivitamins with minerals, fine-tuned for the way you live.
Connie Chung and I, Charles Kuralt, continuing with our coverage of this war in the Gulf, which, as General Dugan pointed out to Morley a minute ago, isn't even 24 hours old yet, though it seems to some of us that it's been going on a long time. We're going to go down to Fort Bragg, that community that is giving so much to this war effort and is going to give more as it becomes a ground war, and talk with the wife of one of the GIs who's over there. Lynn Pittman, are you there in Fort Bragg?
Yes, I'm here.
Your husband is, well, tell us about him. He's in the 82nd, is he?
No, he's in the Air Force here at Pope Air Force Base. He's a navigator in a C-130 transport plane.
Oh, my. I imagine you have been thinking of him the last 24 hours.
Absolutely. I know that he's okay, and I'm very proud of him, but my heart is concerned about the results of what could possibly happen.
Ms. Pittman, I come from North Carolina myself and know Fayetteville pretty well. It must be an odd place to be right now with so many of the people who are normally there gone for the duration.
It really is. This isn't new for us, though. We've been going through this now for 5 months and have had a lot of time to contemplate what could happen and how we would feel about it. And certainly you don't really know how you're going to feel about it until it happens. But you see every kind of reaction from people wanting to just hole up in their homes with their families and have that kind of protective safety, to all of us getting together and providing moral support for one another.
Yeah. Let me just interrupt you a second, Ms. Pittman.
Sure.
We're going to take a slight break and come back and talk to you a little more. Lynn Pittman is with us, wife of a man who's flying airplanes over there. Thank you for rejoining us, Ms. Pittman. You said you had heard from your husband. Do you expect to go on hearing from him now that the war has started?
It's very questionable. I know that they're taking out a lot of phone lines over there for obvious reasons of security. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to continue to talk to each other occasionally, but I wouldn't be disappointed or surprised if we weren't able to.
You said your husband flies a transport plane, but you must know a lot of people who fly fighters and bombers who are over there with him.
Well, he knows some folks mostly that do because of his affiliations with them and through his years in the Air Force. But here at Pope Air Force Base, this is a military airlift command base. And so we don't have fighters here. They do up at Seymour Johnson, just a few miles up the road from us.
You were telling me a little something before I had to interrupt you about the feelings of the people who have been left behind. What were you saying? Go on with that.
Well, it's, I think we had all adjusted quite well to the fact that they were gone and we were going on with our lives. And now that this has actually broken out, I even myself sometimes want to just close my house up and grab my 2 little kids and just stay together really close and tight. But I realize we've got to continue on with our lives and our prayers, and it's really a great comfort to be around others who are in the same position as I am, and we can talk to each other and share our fears together and support each other's families as well.
Well, that's going on in a lot of communities in our country today.
Yes, it is.
And we thank you very much, Ms. Pittman, for
Thank you.
joining us.
Thank you very much.
I'm always amazed at how much strength that these relatives have, the wives, the spouses. It's extraordinary. Let us go now to Capitol Hill. Senator Al Gore, Democrat of Tennessee. a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee who voted yes on the authorization to use force. Senator, you did vote yes, but you voted reluctantly. Do you have any second thoughts today?
Well, none at all, Connie. But of course, the entire country is always reluctant to go to war. Saddam Hussein has created this situation. We finally concluded as a nation that we had no other choice. We gave him every reasonable opportunity to resolve the matter without what is now happening. He turned all those opportunities down, and that in itself served as evidence that we're right in this, because one of our principal reasons was to prevent a much worse, much more dangerous war at some future time. What we're doing is right.
But how do we know that that isn't going to happen, because Saddam Hussein is not giving up?
Well, we may have some very difficult days that lie just ahead. I personally believe that the success of this initial phase increases the odds even more that we will definitely prevail. I never had any doubt that we would. Not many in the debate did, as far as I could tell. But in order to prevent some future more dangerous war, we must not only win this war decisively, which we will, we must win the peace in the aftermath of this war. And the same kind of meticulous planning and preparation which created this success on the battlefield in the air phase of this war must now be brought to planning for success in the aftermath, to look at the possibility of a vacuum of power, to stop weapons of mass destruction from coming into the region to countries like Iraq.
How do we do that, Senator Gore? We have discussed this earlier on this program. The suggestion was that the United States has to be careful to be sure to place somebody, or with the help of the United Nations, place someone in power to take over Saddam Hussein. So there isn't a vacuum. But that seems so terribly difficult.
Well, the vacuum I'm speaking of is not the leadership vacuum in Baghdad if and when Saddam Hussein is deposed, but rather the regional vacuum with Iran on one side and Syria on the other, looking covetously at territory that has in various times in history been disputed between Iraq and its neighbors. And so let's look at the role Turkey can play, with NATO playing a new role oriented not as much toward the Soviet Union, but playing an even stronger role in promoting stability in the Gulf. And to return to one point I just briefly mentioned earlier, let's stop the technology flow into this region that can give countries like Iraq nuclear weapons in the future and chemical weapons. We've got to have an international determination to stop that proliferation of weaponry in the Mideast.
Senator Gore, looking at the issue more at hand, the Americans are probably sitting out there feeling quite good at this point that we haven't sustained any major or many casualties. Is there a reason to believe that this could be a fast, quick war, that it could end early?
Well, Connie, there are some uncertainties that still are out there. We don't know how toughly the Iraqi ground forces are going to resist. There has always been a chance that they would break and run. But that's where their experience has been in warfare, on the ground. And the odds are still that they'll be much tougher there. So while we are feeling so optimistic, and there's this intense feeling of pride in what our servicemen and women have done, let's protect ourselves as a nation against the emotional roller coaster that could happen to us if we run into some very hard days just immediately ahead.
Senator
this
Gore,
thing's not over.
In the last 15 to 20 seconds that we have, you are a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Are you privy to any information that would suggest that the United States has already launched a ground war?
Well, no, except that we've had reports that have been in the open press about the massing of troops and the movement toward the Kuwaiti border. But I do not have information that the hostilities on the ground have begun, except for
Senator
a report
Gore,
from the media.
I must interrupt you. Forgive me. Thank you for being with us from Capitol Hill. We will be back with more of our Desert Storm coverage in just a moment. Thank you.
CBS News headquarters in New York, continuing coverage of Showdown in the Gulf. Connie Chung and Charles Kuralt.
Good day. Our Persian Gulf coverage continues, and here are the latest headlines. The White House calls on Saddam Hussein to surrender. New air attacks against Baghdad. U.S. and allied troops massed near the Kuwaiti border. An Iraqi ambassador says the attack on Israel is coming, and Iraq claims destruction of dozens of U.S. planes and missiles. U.S. Air Force pilots gave the thumbs-up signal to their comrades taking off on yet more bombing missions against Iraq. Defense Secretary Cheney says more than 1,000 sorties have been flown so far, that 80% of the sorties hit their targets. Not without a cost. 1 U.S. and 1 British warplane have been downed, 3 crewmen killed. Baghdad radio claims 44 attacking planes have been shot down. Kuwait's ambassador to the UN had news that a Kuwaiti warplane had been hit in action.
I report to you that one of our A4 Skyhawk aircraft has not returned to its base. The pilot has ejected near the Saudi-Kuwaiti border as a result of anti-aircraft shelling. Rescue operations are now underway.
At the White House, spokesman Marlon Fitzwater said all Saddam has to do is lay down his arms and surrender and comply with UN demands to leave Kuwait, and the fighting would stop. A still defiant Saddam Hussein was seen on Iraqi television today being greeted in the streets of Baghdad. The apparent success of the Allied air attack sent Wall Street, meanwhile. This is a picture of Saddam Hussein today with his supporters. Back to Wall Street now. Wall Street is soaring. Oil prices are plummeting. Charles.
Connie, you know, when this whole conflict arose, Saddam Hussein warned that if war came, he would strike at the United States all over the world. Well, we're beginning to get some reports of that now. Pretty minor stuff so far, I think. The USIA library in Quito, Ecuador, of all places, has been hit by a bomb, which someone presumes to be an Iraqi bomb. Let's talk about that for a few minutes, beginning with Leslie Stahl at the White House. Leslie, can you tell us any more about this international terrorism that's beginning to crop up?
I can tell you, Charles, that the White House is totally unaware of any of these incidents. They say that some of the cases of attacks on U.S. buildings in various cities around the world are old reports that buildings were struck before war broke out yesterday morning. At least 1 or 2 they recognize as earlier incidents. They know of no, I mean 0, attacks on any U.S. building, any U.S. interest anywhere in the world as of now, starting last night when the hostilities started. They are very specific that there have been no acts of terrorism inside Saudi Arabia as well. They're unaware of any of this. Charles.
Let's bring Dick Threlkeld into this conversation from London. Dick, what about you? Have you heard of any certified examples of Iraqi terrorism?
No, Charles. Leslie's quite right. Terrorism by Iraq at this very early stage is really more of a matter of concern in Europe, at least, than a matter of fact. There was one case of vandalism reported, apparently connected. There were 3 stores which were set fire to in Bonn, Germany today. One of them a Woolworths, which was fairly substantially damaged, but I'm not sure whether you'd call that terrorism. There's a great deal of counterterrorism going on here in London and in other capitals. As somebody who spent much of last night at Gatwick Airport near London, I can testify that security measures are very harsh indeed. And let's not forget that Saddam Hussein runs what is probably the largest terrorist network in the entire world. Among other things, he's responsible for the assassination of an Israeli diplomat back in 1983, which the Israelis blamed on Yasser Arafat, and which you will recall started their invasion of Lebanon. So he's certainly capable of it.
Let me just roll back briefly on Quito, Ecuador. That was an even more minor incident than I thought. Turns out to be stones thrown at the United States Embassy, an obvious example of protest rather than terrorism. But I wouldn't be surprised, would either of you, Leslie or Dick, if we do see some genuine examples of Saddam carrying the war to the United States beyond the borders of the Persian Gulf?
And not just Saddam, Charles. I think you can expect, for example, if this continues, in various parts of the Middle East, most notably Jordan, which has a largely Palestinian population now, you're going to see a lot of reaction, a lot of it violent. Not terrorism so much, but I think American installations there may be in great jeopardy.
And that might come, that sort of thing, even after a famous American victory, yes?
Well, Charles, there could be individual acts of rage without an order from Saddam Hussein. That's possible. There could be some kind of terrorism triggered by what I was told a couple of days ago were preparations put in place by Saddam Hussein as many weeks ago as 4 or 5 weeks ago. There could be operations that were planned and are just waiting for a go. In other words, everything's set up. Nobody knows. The United States government has taken enormous precautions. Here at the White House, I can look across at Lafayette Park and see more police out here than I've seen in a long time. People are jittery about it. Extra precautions at airports. Everybody expects it. But let me repeat, the White House is unaware of any specific act against any American interest anywhere in the world as of last night when the war started. And I get no feeling here in this White House right now that their concern is any more heightened than it's been throughout this period, where, as you point out, they're expecting something, but they know of nothing so far.
Leslie Stahl in Washington. Yeah, go ahead, Dick.
Yeah, if I can just very quickly make a distinction here, which I think is important. Terrorist experts who are much smarter than we are in these things make the distinction that there's a very great chance of a threat of terrorism here in Europe or against American installations elsewhere in the world, much less so in the United States. So if you're a U.S. citizen living in Chicago or Washington or San Francisco, I think you're a lot safer than if you're in London or Bonn.
No doubt. Thank you, Richard. I heard yesterday that gas masks were selling well in Australia, of all places, so it shows you how frightened people can get in a situation like this. No reason to be frightened in the U.S. so far. Honey.
Charles, David Martin is at the Pentagon. He has some new information on Tomahawk missile attacks. David?
Connie, the Navy is in the process of firing off another salvo of these Tomahawk cruise missiles. Those are the same missiles that were among the first shots fired in this war last night. And these are, of course, these low-flying unmanned aircraft that are pre-programmed to go after a target. They usually send them after a heavily defended target because, of course, you're not having to risk the life of a pilot to do that. Don't know exactly how many cruise missiles are being fired off this time around, but there is a limit to this, at least as far as Tomahawk cruise missiles are concerned, because there are roughly about 500 Tomahawk cruise missiles in theater. So if they keep it up at this pace, within a number of days, they're going to expend all of these Tomahawk cruise missiles. Of course, if they keep it up at this pace, they may run out of targets before they run out of missiles. Now, at the same time that is going on, the Air Force has started using its A-10s. That's a very ugly aircraft. It's called the Warthog. It's a very slow-flying aircraft that is used normally to go after tanks. But what the Air Force is using them for right now is to go after communications and radar sites inside Kuwait. As of now, none of these airstrikes have been targeted against troops or really any combat units in the field in Kuwait, except for those artillery pieces that were firing into Saudi Arabia last night. These planes are basically going after the eyes and the ears of the Iraqi forces, going after the division headquarters, going after these communication sites, going after the radar sites. You sort of try and knock out the central nervous system, and then if you still have to, then and only then do you go after individual pieces of equipment like tanks. How much longer this is going to take, I don't know, but I would think that the fact that these A-10s are now flying is another sign of confidence that the U.S. has almost complete control of the skies, because the A-10 is not an airplane that can really defend itself very well against, say, a surface-to-air missile or against an interceptor. So I think you could say that the Air Force is demonstrating increasing confidence in its ability to operate over enemy airspace.
David, since these A-10s are not being used against troops, or what does that say about a possible ground war and the fact that we know that the Allied troops are at the Kuwaiti border?
Well, I think we are a couple of days at most away from any ground offensive. A ground offensive, no matter how well things are going now, a ground offensive is going to almost by definition entail more casualties. And I think if it comes to a ground offensive, they will first go in and try and kill as many of the Iraqi troops as they can with bombing. For instance, laying down whole strings of B-52 bombs into the trenches that are dug along the border there. And that is going to be a wholesale slaughter. And I think as much as the U.S. is determined to use its force without tying any hands behind anybody's back, I think they are sort of cringing at the prospect of the kind of slaughter that would entail, and are hoping that something else happens first before they get to that stage.
David, you're aware of the report from Paris from the French Defense Ministry, from the Chief of Defense, that the Iraqis are no longer capable of launching a serious chemical attack against, for instance, Israel or Saudi Arabia. What is the Pentagon saying about that?
Well, I have not checked that specific report. I'm hearing it for the first time from you, but let me tell you a couple things. One, the only way they're going to launch a chemical weapon into either Israel or Saudi Arabia is with a Scud missile. That's the only weapon that really has the range that can do that. There never has been any hard evidence that the Iraqis ever had the capability to put a chemical warhead on top of that Scud missile. Everybody planned for the worst and trained as if they had that capability, but there was never any proof that they had that capability. On top of that, of course, we have gone in and knocked out as many of the Scud missile launch sites as we can find. However, at this morning's briefing here at the Pentagon, Defense Secretary Cheney pointed out that there are also mobile Scud missile launchers, and those, of course, are much harder to find. The Iraqis have been hiding them under highway overpasses and things like that, so you can't be sure that all of these mobile launchers have been knocked out. That would be the continuing threat.
All right. David Martin at the Pentagon, thank you. Let us go now to Doug Tunnell in Amman, Jordan. Doug, Leslie Stahl reported to us earlier that Radio Jordan was broadcasting hostile invectives about the U.S. and that the U.S. has had no contact with King Hussein. What can you tell us?
Well, the king has met with some diplomats. A Soviet envoy met with King Hussein earlier today. But yes, the reaction here has been quite hostile. And in fact, the government released a statement earlier today deploring what it calls what happened during the first few hours of today, which, the statement said, constitutes a brutal attack against an Arab and Muslim country. The Jordanians are very angry about the size and scope of the attack against Iraq. I think that many were not surprised that the attack came, but the anger just can't be understated here. At the same time, Connie, from our monitoring post here in Amman, we've been picking up a lot of claims from the Iraqi military, broadcast on Iraqi state radio, as to the Iraqi account of how the battle's going. And these claims, I should warn you, don't jive at all with the kind of accounts we're receiving from our own military command in Tehran and Riyadh and elsewhere. The Iraqis are claiming that they've shot down 40 Allied aircraft, 23 cruise missiles. They say that at least 23 civilians have been killed, no mention of military casualties so far. And there are other claims that have come from Iraqi diplomats in Europe saying that there is still an attack on Israel that is in the works, that is still a capability for the Iraqi military. These claims are seen here not so much to be statements of fact. I'm not even sure that people who hear them on the Arabic radio stations believe such wild numbers. But they seem to be an effort to show that Iraq did fight back and is still fighting back, an effort to show that what many fear was a frail response on the part of the Iraqis was even more powerful than it seemed at first. There are a lot of spirits that need to be buoyed in a place like this where so many support Saddam Hussein and support his forces in Iraq.
Thank you.
Connie.
Doug Tennell, and Aman Jordan. Thank you very much. Charles, so there we have it. David Martin saying that the United States is now using A-10 aircraft, normally used against tanks, in this case against communication centers, I believe he said, or communication sites, not used against troops, which would lead David to believe, and based on his experience and knowledge, that the ground war would not occur, in his estimation, for at least 2 days until B-52s are brought in to bring the troops at a much lower level in Iraq.
Well, we heard General Chris say a little while ago that if he were a commander on the ground, he certainly would not want to go against those Iraqi fortifications in southern Kuwait without a good deal more bombing than has been done before. Let's catch people up with a brief rundown of the headlines now as our coverage of Operation Desert Storm continues. Iraq has claimed that it has downed scores of Allied planes. There's no reason to put any credence in that claim, but that's the claim. An Iraqi envoy, the Iraqi ambassador to Belgium, promises an attack on Israel is still coming. French officials say forces have neutralized Iraq's chemical warfare ability, but that's not what the Iraqi ambassador to Belgium says. He says, we'll find out as soon as we cross that line. Iraq still has a chemical capability. People are actually reported fleeing to Iran to escape the bombing, if you can imagine that. Those two countries were at war for years. Now Iran is considered a safe haven by some Iraqi refugees. Baghdad Radio says Iraq has downed 44 Allied planes and 23 missiles. No confirmation of that report, no real reason to believe it. United States officials confirm only one United States plane has been down, one Navy pilot killed. This, as another wave of bombing washes over the capital city of Iraq right now. The border between Saudi Arabia and Kuwait remains quiet. As we were saying, no sign of any ground attack yet, but more Allied forces are reported moving up toward that border. Iraq's envoy to Belgium, as I said, says an attack on Israel is coming. Belgian radio reports he said the decision has been made and the United States is exaggerating the success of its air raids and so on. He vows Iraq is going to use chemical warfare yet if Allied forces move into Kuwait. French officials claim that forces have neutralized Iraq's chemical warfare capability. I seem now to be repeating myself, Connie. I guess that catches people up on what's been going on.
But I think there's no harm in repeating ourselves because the information comes and I'm sure people are tuning in and out as they're available to watch. Earlier this morning, Paul Azan and Harry Smith had interviewed Benjamin Netanyahu, an Israeli official, and Bernie Goldberg, he seemed to be saying that, of course, he was pleased that nothing has happened thus far in Israel, but does Israel still have reason to worry? And is Israel worried that an Iraqi attack could still occur?
Well, if not worried, at least on serious alert. Israel's Army's Chief of Staff, General Dan Shamron, has just been interviewed on Israeli radio for a military assessment from Israel's point of view. He says Israel assumes that some of the Iraqi missile launchers, the mobile ones that they're so concerned about, remain intact. Shamron also assumes that it's possible some Iraqis will carry out suicide missions. He says that he praised America's military efforts, and he also said that he would not comment on whether Israel had any early warning about the start of the war. The general also said to the people of Israel that while there is no need for panic, the danger remains and Israelis should, repeat, should not feel secure yet. We mentioned earlier that the Iraqi ambassador to Belgium says in a radio interview that Saddam Hussein intends to strike Israel. That threat remains. And we have another quote from that same Iraqi ambassador to Belgium. He says, "The war has only just started. It will be a very long war."
Thank you, Bernie. Susan Spencer joins us. We've been talking from the very beginning about how before this war started, Susan, the country is pretty evenly divided on whether it should start now. I think our last poll showed 47% saying, yes, go ahead and launch an attack, and 46% of the American people saying, no, wait, see if sanctions might not do the job. Do you sense any different mood now that hostilities have really begun? I think I do. I think I feel many people saying, gosh, now there's really no choice but to support those forces in the Gulf.
Well, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, the distinction that we're now able to make, I think because a real debate was held in this country, and people do respect either point of view here in terms of whether this is a wise long-term action. We were talking earlier, though, that regardless of your feeling about it, it's not a question of whether or not you, quote, support the troops in the Gulf. I don't think that either view of this in the long term indicates any lack of support for, and certainly, you know, wish for their success. It's more political questions long term. The other thing that struck me earlier was in you're talking about the weapons systems and how we're strategizing and figuring out what's going on based on what's moving where. One of the guests earlier was saying, you know, even as confused as this is and as sketchy as this is, we know so much more about this than the Iraqis do, that we know more than Saddam Hussein does at this point about what's going on. And there's just this continual thirst for information, every little shred that we can come up with to help clarify what's going on there. Imagine what those people are thinking.
I have a hunch that these demonstrations we're beginning to see, not just in the United States, there were 35,000 people marching last night in Milan and 45,000 in Barcelona as the news spread that the war had started. I have a feeling that if the war is prolonged, the demonstrations will grow here in the United States, that we'll become an even more divided country than we are this afternoon.
I'm sure that's the case. You know, like we said before, this is the first day of the war. It's astonishing that this is there already in some ways. And of course, when things are going well, there is a tendency to want to, you know, be supportive. And when things, obviously, if it turns out badly, then it'll look like it was a very foolish thing to have done. But what I've noticed that's different, I guess, a little bit about these protests is that there doesn't seem to be the venom between the two sides like there was in Vietnam.
Stay here with us just a minute, Susan. We'll go on with this conversation after we take a brief break.
This is a News Channel 5 update. America at War.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Vicki Yates. Here is an update on what we know about the Middle East situation at this hour. France's Armed Forces chief reports Iraq is no longer able to launch a serious chemical weapons attack against its allies. The Turkish parliament has authorized U.S.-led forces to use its military bases for attack against Iraq. The pilot of a Kuwaiti warplane was shot down but reportedly ejected from the aircraft before it crashed. Saudi Arabia says it has destroyed the air base that launched an attack on one of its refineries. At last word, that refinery near the Kuwaiti border was burning out of control. The Saudis say Allied forces have hit 2 of Iraq's refineries, which are also burning at this hour. Reports of casualties are coming in. So far, 1 American Navy pilot is confirmed dead, 1 French pilot wounded, 1 Kuwaiti pilot was shot down but ejected safely from his aircraft, and a search is underway for 2 British flyers whose plane was shot down. The Iraqis claim they shot down 44 Allied warplanes and report 23 Iraqi civilians are dead. The American was flying an F-18 fighter plane. It is not known whether the plane was shot down or crashed. Tennessee National Guardsmen were involved in the initial attack, but at a briefing this morning, Adjutant General Carl Wallace reported no casualties. Another briefing is set for 3 o'clock this afternoon. The Commander-in-Chief of Tennessee's National Guard made his first comments on Operation Desert Storm this past hour. Governor Ned McWhorter called on all Tennesseans to support President Bush and pray for peace. McWhorter said he knew the Allied airstrike was imminent.
Yes. Yesterday afternoon, about 4 o'clock, we were advised that they had moved us up to the top notch of readiness on alert.
McWhorter also told reporters the 568th Personnel Service Company in Smyrna was placed on alert today. It's a 57-member unit. Military bases throughout the nation are taking precautions against possible terrorist attacks. At Fort Campbell, guard dogs are patrolling the base to beef up security. But officials on the base refuse to answer questions about the tightened security. And Bill Harrelson also refuses to answer questions about the 101st's involvement in Operation Desert Storm.
I will not address or answer any questions that pertain to the operation of the division in Saudi Arabia, nor will any of the panel this afternoon.
That briefing will take place at 3 o'clock this afternoon. More on that during our 3:53 update. A history-making day on Wall Street. More on that in just a moment.
Kmart presents the portrait package Moms asked for. You said,
I want more big portraits.
So we give you 3 8x10s, 4 5x7s, and a big 10x13. You also wanted
lots of portraits.
So you also get 20 wallets, 15 mini portraits, and 12 all-occasion caption portraits. That's everything you want plus something you need, a free portrait ID card. So hurry and get Kmart's biggest portrait offer ever, 55 portraits.
Including more big portraits.
All for only $14.95.
Who says money doesn't grow on trees? It does at Food Lion, beginning at the cardboard baler in every Food Lion store. It takes a lot of timber to make a bale like this, so we send it back here to the warehouse. Last year we sold almost 100,000 tons of cardboard and paper from our office and stores for recycling. That amounted to almost $5 million. A big savings on your grocery bill and a big savings on our forest lands. Because at Food Lion, when we save, you save. And so does our environment.
War is making history not only on the battlefield but also on financial markets today. News of initial success in the Gulf sent crude oil prices plunging more than $9 a barrel, their biggest one-day drop in history. At last word, oil was selling on the New York Mercantile Exchange for $24.50 a barrel, down $7.50. But no real changes in prices at the pump today. Our gas gauge shows the average price of regular unleaded in Tennessee stands at $1.23 a gallon. The stock market is shooting through the roof today. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is up 97.52 at 2606.43. That's how most markets throughout the world have been reacting today. Jim Humphreys of Merrill Lynch joins us now to talk about this sudden euphoria in the marketplace. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Humphreys.
Surely.
I understand oil prices fell so low this morning on the New York Exchange. Trading had to be halted for an hour. Now, why are we seeing this kind of a reaction today?
I think what we're seeing here is oil had rallied sharply in the last few days because of this impending attack. Now we're seeing, so far the U.S. has been very successful with their troops, so possibly this is not going to be a drawn-out affair. It'll be fairly short. Hopefully we can get our men home quickly, and again, it will have plenty of oil and gas.
Okay, many analysts are warning that this sudden burst of adrenaline might fade quickly. Now, if it does, what will happen?
I think we'll get back to looking at the real economics of a situation. We're talking about the economy. Yes, the military situation is a concern, but hopefully that'll be behind us and we can reflect on the economy, the weakness there, and try to alleviate those problems.
It's busy in our newsroom. It's busy in your office as well. What are you telling your investors today?
Well, I think based on just one day, you don't make an investment one way or the other just based on a short term. I think you look past this, you make investments looking out 6, 12, 18 months out, and I think that's where one has to proceed.
Now, what does the activity here mean for people like myself who aren't really big investors?
I think with the price of oil coming down, eventually we'll see that in the gas pump. I think that's very positive. I think with the effectiveness of the military action, hopefully this will not be a long, drawn-out affair, taking a lot of our dollars to have to go for war and bullets. Hopefully we can use those dollars to improve our economy here locally.
All right. Thank you very much, Jim Humphreys of Merrill Lynch. Anti-war protests are ringing out from streets across the nation today. Dozens of Nashvillians protested U.S. involvement in the war outside the federal courthouse. In New York this morning, a car slammed into a group of anti-war demonstrators, injuring 7 people. And thousands of protesters rallied on the streets of San Francisco last night. Riot police arrested 100 people for burning and looting there. That is the news at this hour. Stay tuned to News Channel 5 for the latest local developments on the war in the Persian Gulf anytime the situation warrants. Also from time to time today, we'll be giving you telephone numbers set up by the Defense Department for family members. Now back to CBS.
Are smart.
watching CBS News' continuing coverage of Showdown in the Gulf. From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Dan Rather.
Storylines of the hour in our continuing coverage of Gulf War. Tomahawk missile attacks resume. Allied warplanes are pounding Baghdad again. The White House urges Saddam Hussein to lay down his arms. Iraq says that 44 planes have been shot down. The Allies say it is only 3 planes. An Iraqi envoy warns of chemical attack if Allied troops enter Kuwait. CBS News correspondent David Martin at the Pentagon reports U.S. battleships in the Gulf have launched another wave of Tomahawk cruise missiles. At least 100 were fired during last night. Comrades on the ground wished good luck to fellow U.S. pilots taking off from a base inside Saudi Arabia on more bombing missions inside Iraq and Kuwait. At least 1,000 air sorties have been flown so far. At the Pentagon, Joint Chiefs Chairman Colin Powell talked about